This is a kit I've put together for a Weave It Yourself Crios Kit for people who want to learn the traditional Irish weaving from the Aran Islands using the foot method. And here I've already warped it and put the heddles on and separated out the unheddleds and woven about 2 inches so that the person who wants to learn only has to do the weaving and doesn't have to do the setup, which can be a bit intimidating. Here are all the parts of it. Down here we have the 2 inches of woven length at the working end and this little braid which can be undone and finished at any time. Then we have the heddle rod with all the heddles and then all the warp strands that are heddled on there. And then we have the unheddled bundle here, which is a bundle of all the warps that are unheddled. Then we have these periodical knots which keep the warp kind of neat and from getting tangled while you're working, but also at each point there's this like little tying anchoring string which you can tie to your foot, or you can tie into a loop and put your foot through, or you can tie it to a really sturdy stationary object to pull against while you do your weaving. And then as you go, you'll undo these or you'll move them around. And you may have to at the start move the location of this a little bit depending on how long your leg is or how far away your anchoring point is. And you'll undo these and work your way down the weaving. You start by the first knot. You either tie it into a little loop or you tie it to your shoe, whichever one is what you want to do. And if you tie it into a loop, it should be big enough that your foot can fit through it. Here, I'm doing it in a loop, and then I'm fitting the loop over my shoe, and you want it to be pretty secure so you can pull on it pretty tightly. Once you have that on your foot, you're going to find a comfortable position for you to weave in. This is going to be different for every person. I'm going to be doing it like this with my legs slightly crossed, the one I'm working on over the other. It might just be both legs on the ground like this. It might be that you've actually tied your knot to a sturdy tethering point like this, and that you're going to pull against that instead of your own leg, and that's totally fine. Normally when I'm weaving, I sit flat on the ground with my legs out in front of me because that's what's easiest to me. Find what's good for you. So the first thing you have to do before you can actually start weaving is you have to find out where your weft is and what it's doing. So mine, you can see, comes out on this side, and now we're going to find out which is on top, whether the heddled strings is on top or the unheddled strings. And it's really important when you're holding it that you have your rods on top like this, and you haven't got it upside down with your rods below you like this. You always want your rods to be on top. So here we've got our little weft thread here, and we're going to follow. This is the layer that's on top. And we're going to follow one of the warp threads, and see, it's on a heddle. That means our heddle is on top. If you followed it and your heddle isn't on top, that just means that your unheddled is on top, which is this looped ring down here, and all of the warps that are in this little bundle. But since our heddled are on top, that means we're going to have to bring the unheddled above the heddled first. And if your unheddled was on top, you have to bring your heddled above your unheddled first. So we do this by we grab the bundle that they're all in, and we slip our hands under in the little space that's made there, and then we kind of work it like this to bring the unheddled above the heddled. And you can kind of flick it. I flick it with my thumb a little bit, which helps. And then when you get to the point where the heddles are here with their heddled strings, kind of just do that a little bit more. And kind of gently you want to do this while pulling with your left hand back on the weaving to keep tension. And then at a certain point here, you'll see you're able to kind of see the heddles here, and you're able to kind of grab them with one of your fingers. And then you're able to move your hand so that you're now holding the unheddled above the heddled past where the heddled strings are. And then you can bring down the unheddled to be on top, at the base of your weaving where the next row is going to be. And then you pull on all your little threads. If any of them look uneven, like right here, you can kind of tug specifically on those ones to make sure they're nice. And if you ever lose it, you can go back down to your unhuddled and do that. And sometimes I can take my left hand and I can put it between like this, and still I can pull but the tension like this, but now I'm separating the layers with my index finger. And I can do that especially when pulling to make sure the tension on each specific string is right. And now what you can do is you can pass your weft through to make this row into like solid fact row. And here we have the side that it's coming out of, and so we're going to go back in from that same direction, not like from that direction, from this direction. And that should at some point give you this little loop here that's going to pull into the weaving. And it's important you pay extra attention right to your edge. Some people have trouble with the edges. And there you've made your first row. And then, since now our unhuddleds are on top and our huddleds are inside on the bottom, we need to pull the huddleds up above the unhuddleds. And to do that, you hold onto your rod and you bring it up, and with your left hand you're still pulling tension. You need to keep that tight pretty much all the time, and you pull up and to the side, up and to the side, and that, you see, makes this little kind of triangle shape there. And you can sometimes, if it's having trouble, you can pin your weaving with your arm and use your left hand to kind of pull at those. And then eventually you should have a pretty solid separation between the layers again, except this time with the huddled threads on top. And then you can bring that down to your weaving. If your threads ever get stuck together, like they're clumping or sticking together, you can just pull them apart a little bit with your hands. And now you've got your second layer here. And again, you just want to make sure everything's looking nice, which you can do by putting your hand there, and you can use that to pull back while keeping your layers separate. And if you look like any particular string is looking a little shabby, like it's a little bundly or not quite evenly tensioned like you want it to be, you can pull on those specific warp threads. And that's one of the interesting things about this kind of weaving, as opposed to almost every other weaving, is that it doesn't really matter if all of your strings are perfectly tensioned all the time, or if even the strings are necessarily exactly the same length. In other kinds of weaving, it's really important that everything is being pulled on exactly the same at exactly the same time. But on this kind, because you're doing each thing individually and by hand, and you don't have it on any sort of frame or any sort of point, and you're doing it all with your hands, you can pull on each individual thread to make sure it's nice, rather than having to do it the other way. Like on my ankle loom, if one thread was slightly uneven with the other, it would be horrible and I wouldn't be able to weave nicely. And then your thread's coming out over here, so you're going to pass your weft thread through there. I personally don't like how this is looking over here, so I'm going to work on that, making that nice a little bit. And then you can also sometimes, if things are looking not quite even, it's sometimes in the weft and you need to tighten your weft a little bit. So that's helping. And then also in the kit, it has, as you go, a little thing here, which is the width check that you can just compare to see, oh, am I getting too far off? If the width of your weaving isn't matching with the markings on this check. And then that's just how you do it. You just keep going back and forth. And then eventually when you get weaving a certain length, you'll want to undo this knot entirely and move on to the next knot, or you'll want to move this knot down a little bit, depending on how exactly long your leg is and how long your arms are and things like that. Another thing you're going to eventually have to do is you're going to have to switch your weft. So while you still have about 2 and a little bit of your widths of weaving of your tail left of your old weft, you're going to replace a new one. And you're going to start by taking your same old weft tail, the tail from your old weft, and passing it through a row like normal. And then before you switch to the next row, you're going to take a new weft ball and you're going to pass that ball through the same row just like you did your old weft, but also with a new weft. So you'll have your old weft and your new weft both going through the same row with a little tail from your new weft on one side. And there are the two strings together as buddies, weft buddies. And then you're going to take your new row. And essentially what you're doing is you're just taking those two wefts together for a couple rows, and then your old weft will end leaving a tail on one side and your new weft will continue on without it. So here the two buddies are going together and they're going to go through that row. Both of them, 2 wefts, 1 row. And then you switch rows again. And then after this, the new weft is going to carry on without the old weft, and the old weft is just going to be a little tail. And here he goes, dropping the old weft and only going on with the new weft. Then either at the end of the weaving or when you've woven a couple more rows, you can go ahead and just trim your 2 little tails off and see it's hardly visible that you changed wefts at all. This is how I do my ends, which on one end you can do whenever you like, and you can do the other end when you finish, is I do one end of just tassels and one end of braids. You can do both tassels, both braids. You can do an unknown third option that you made up yourself. Live your life. But this is how I do mine. And on this pattern, I separate them like this because I think it looks nice with the pattern. And I tend to pick the way to separate them evenly-ish, but also by the pattern segments. And after many hours, you will finally have your kris and you will be able to wear it. Here I'm demonstrating the traditional way to tie it, but there are other ways, including ways that look very similar to this, but don't take as much length to tie it. People also use them as the waistbands on skirts or as guitar straps. And I hope you have a great time weaving and feel very accomplished.